And also, one very nice thing about what Ray and her new colleagues, Emma, and sort of Anna and Elmo sort of do in their chats is they have a discourse about language learning that goes sort of deeper than, it does talk about sort of practical ways of learning language, but it also goes deeper and talks about many issues connected with language learning that aren't often addressed in traditional sort of language learning. And hence she speaks many languages, including both European and Asian languages. And I'll let her start her talk now. So Teresa-Rae, whenever you're ready, please fire away and share your screen.
Sure, yes, let me do that. Hello, so what a lovely introduction. Press present on this here. So I was trying to think of how best to give a really practical talk today, so that if for the audience and whatnot. And so I thought about talking about isolating language skills for acquisition efficiency, so learning efficiency. And that's because we often have this idea that you have to learn languages, each different language skill, at an equal level as you come up, which is not necessarily the case. It's also not necessarily the most efficient way either. So I want to introduce something different, because a lot of the time we can get discouraged if we have a specific format in which we have to learn, or perhaps there's a lot of things a lot of hoops you have to go through to learn things, and you want to get to this part of speaking a new language or reading a new language or writing a new language, and you don't necessarily enjoy that part. So this is allowing you to kind of turn the system on its head and create a pathway for yourself. Okay, so contents, important. Okay, so about me a little bit. I speak Jamaican patois, English, Spanish, Korean, Japanese, Mandarin, and Swedish is my most recent one. I am born and raised in Jamaica with experience living in the US for several years, Korea, Japan, and now I'm actually located in Sweden for the most part, but right now I am in Jamaica because I'm back home for the summer. As you can tell, Marty, I'm from a multicultural background to some sense. I am mixed, very mixed. So I was introduced to a lot of different cultures when I was young, which made me interested in these kind of things. I was the first ever to test and pass the Japanese examinations, like at the embassy in Jamaica, the youngest to ever do so. The recipient of Global Citizen Award, which started me down this whole idea of what is a global citizen, how I can incorporate languages into lifestyle and being a citizen of the world instead of just, our small space. And so this is also kind of connecting to the topic of this conference for me, because it's that language is often looked at this very isolated subject, but really it's one of the only subjects that touches on almost every aspect of what you do, because it's the lens in which you do everything, any humanistic aspect. Then I started teaching in 2011, and I've been teaching for a long time now. And I also coach languages and self-mastery otherwise. Okay. All right, the broken system, I call it, a bit dramatic, but we learn languages in a very specific way, quite outdated way, depending on where you're from, but especially if you're from an English-speaking space, your experience learning language has been quite subpar. We do this thing where we try to have everything on the same level. We learn a little bit of this, a little bit of that. We follow the same textbook laddering. We don't have any real idea of how language knowledge forms or how we actually acquire knowledge in the first place. We are just continuing to kind of memorize words and see if we can compare things, translate things into our own native language, and it usually is not very fruitful. It's actually a very academic way to study, and I say that not because it's the school system's way, but because it's systematic to help you to read and write a bit faster so that you can translate or perhaps write papers or, you know, use that specific skill, but it doesn't actually give you a comfortable working new framework in a language very easily. So I have some food for thought questions here. How effective has language learning been for you? How predictable is your progress? How is your experience in school? So does anyone here have a good experience where they felt very comfortable? They know exactly, like, if I study for 3 months, I'll be able to do this? Or is it all kind of like grasping in the dark? What do you think? I can't see anyone actually, so I'm just gonna have you think about it. Yeah. For me, at least, it has always been quite, and in my experience with most of my students, people are just doing what the textbook says. They're not actually sure how any of this works, which is a problem. So let's imagine childhood acquisition a bit. How do children learn languages? And yes, childhood linguistic, the process of learning a second language or first language, even as a child, is different from how it is as an adult, but there's a lot we can learn from it. So first of all, we learn how to listen first, or we automatically listen a lot to the sounds around us. And then we start to mimic, we start to speak, and we focus on speaking for several years of our life. We don't learn to write until we go to school, between 4 to 6 years later, after we start learning how to speak. Then we add symbols to it, we add reading to it, and then we finally get good at writing, maybe not until like high school. If you think, people always say that children learn languages much faster, but if you're thinking about it, you spend your entire life learning how to use your native language well. I don't know about you, but if you've seen a middle schooler write an essay or even a short journal entry, the mistakes, the ability to read the sentences even can be very, very off, especially in my experience. So the truth is that, oh, sorry about that. The truth is that children don't necessarily learn faster than us. They just have a different way of doing it. They're willing to make mistakes. They're heavy into speaking first. They layer information on top of each other. They start with one skill, they layer another skill on top of it, and each skill adds to the next in order to create a good momentum for learning and a holistic, and eventually you become you get adult competency. All right, isolating your skills. So when you study, you can get better progress predictability. So you can know that in 3 months, if I focus on the speaking skill alone, I'll be able to do X, Y, Z. Or if I focus on, we can go even more specific than that. If I focus on being able to watch this type of YouTube video and understand without subtitles, for example, the predictability is much better than I want to become fluent in Spanish in the next 2 years, right? Faster progression. So you actually move faster because you are hitting targets. And every time you hit a target, that target then adds on layers to the next target that you have. The skills carry over and it gets easier and easier to improve. Better motivation. because you see yourself hitting goals consistently, so you get more motivation, you feel more empowered to continue. Flexibility, depending on what your goals are, you can focus on different skills and you can build your ladder, your ideas in different ways, which is where our adult learning can differ from the way that it's done in childhood naturally. And then your laddered skills over time also are much more solid than if you try to take bits and pieces and just memorize words over a long period of time. You have less chance of forgetting and you have a more profound understanding of the language. Okay, so now I want to look at this sort of crazy Venn diagram a bit. It's a bit, there's 4 aspects, so it looks quite complicated, but it's not really complicated. Each skill, each language skill connects in some way, and especially, and some more than others, but of course each one touches each other. So when I say isolate a skill and I say, okay, well, if you want to be able to listen well, you should study listening. Or, you know, more famously, everyone's like, oh, I've been studying language for 3 years and I can't speak. But if you look at what they're studying, they've been studying how to read consistently for 3 years and have not practiced speaking at all, but they expect themselves to be able to speak. And so I try to remind people that if you want to get better at a specific skill, you have to actually use that skill or practice that skill or use methods to learn and improve that skill. But at the same time, each skill has different ways of affecting other skills as well. So by understanding this, you'll be able to, again, get better at predicting how you can improve in your language and also deciding what kind of exercises will allow you to improve the skills that you want to improve. I also have these little definitions here. So we have fluency and production, literacy, comprehension. So there's a lot of like, no, I shouldn't say a lot. There's like zero consensus on what these words mean in the language space, not necessarily the linguistic space, that's decided, but in the language community space and how people talk about SLA, because everyone views their competency in a different way. I've defined them like this because I think these words are more helpful to understanding your process instead of just giving you a one big overword to say, okay, I'm fluent now, which doesn't actually mean anything since we don't have any good definitions. It's hard to measure. So fluency would be a competency between both speaking and listening. Production is a competency of speaking and writing. Literacy, ability to write and read, and comprehension, the ability to listen and read. And so focusing on these different areas can also be very advantageous, because you are strengthening tools or strengthening the sides, the speaking skill, the writing skill, the skills that kind of add up together. So like if you study speaking, then it helps your listening. If you study listening, then it helps your speaking quite directly. Okay, so going a bit more into that. So when we look at this one, I gave some suggestions, some examples of how these different skills affect each other. So, for example, the more words you say, then the more you notice them when you're listening. So when we watch TV shows, we often do it passively. So say you're immersing yourself, we do it passively. When we watch a TV show, we're just listening. But did you know if you repeat after them, or if you pause it and just say one phrase over, for example, the next time you hear it, you're actually more likely to hear it jump out at you because your muscles recognize the sound, and because you've reiterated that and created a new kind of connection in your brain on that thing. So it's good to be aware of these little things so that you push yourself to do some things that may seem a little bit weirder to do. You know, it's not so comfortable to do, like you're sitting in your room by yourself, watching TV show, repeating random stuff. It kind of seems weird. But these little things affect the other things. So of course, the more obvious one, the more you hear words, the better you remember to say them. The more you write, is actually the better you'll be able to speak in a certain sense as well, because you'll be able to finesse your speaking. When you write things down, you are more, solid. You feel the things that you're doing a bit more solidly because you've written it down. You can see what you were saying. It's kind of similar to, say, practicing a speech. When you write it down, things become more concrete. So you'll see also writing helps speaking in a quite different way from the way that listening helps speaking. Okay. Here's some more suggestions, and these are not extensive lists, by the way, including the last slide. These are just some things that I put here to give you examples. But when you're doing specific skills, these are the ways that I like to do it. Listening, you have both active and passive listening. So passive, you're not really doing anything, you're just listening. This is what people would usually refer to as immersion, but immersion to me actually can be both active and passive as well. Active would be that you're doing something while listening. So for example, I like to set a small quota of words that I want to hear, like write down, just to make my ears a bit more alert while I'm listening. Or for example, deciding to repeat at least 5 sentences from the video. So that's more active, trying to engage the content that you're listening to, or you're taking notes, or you're doing a response, something like that would be more active. So you can use podcasts, which is my favorite, because you can usually support somebody, a small creator, quite individually, quite directly, but also TV shows, actual conversations you're having with people, YouTube videos. Some tools I suggest is like Youglish. You can search a new vocabulary word and it will give you YouTube videos with that vocab word in it. Memrise has tiny little videos of native speakers pronouncing the new words that you learn. Language Reactor gives you 2 subtitles on Netflix so that you can listen and also see what you're hearing. For example, reading. This one you'll be more familiar with: graded readers, apps, textbooks, children's books that are made specifically for the reason of, to allow children to learn new words. So that can be very powerful. Simplified news, I use that a lot for Swedish, and blogs and social media are very helpful as well, especially to integrate into your lifestyle. Journaling prompts for writing, exam prep. Texting, super powerful as a stepping stone to the bigger writing. Speaking, talking to yourself, that's a great one. Shadowing, podcasts, TV shows, again, the same things that you can do with listening, except you would put the focus heavier on speaking. Yes. So through one skill, you can unlock a whole new world. So for example, I just wanted to kind of rep this home, but you don't have to learn everything at once in order to already interact with a new space, with a new world. I have friends, I also have clients who have decided that they don't really want to speak in this language yet. They don't feel the call to do that. They want to just learn how to read because they want to unlock a whole new literary space. Or for you, for example, research, new papers, things like that, new perspectives on what you're researching and considering in your studies. For example, it can be very powerful to learn reading and writing in separate and apart from speaking and listening, if that calls to you. Or you can decide to just focus on speaking because you want to conduct interviews in a specific space, for example, and that is all okay, because skills can ladder, and it's okay for it to be done separately and to build over time slowly. So personally, I tend to focus on speaking and listening, the production side, not the production side, the output side, much closer, much more in focus than the rest of it. And then later, if I feel so called to become God tier in that language, I add on the other sides of the skills. Okay, that was my presentation. And I can take any questions. And also, if you want to find me, we Gladly Global, we have a server, a community space on Discord where we share tips and study together and bolster each other's language learning if you're interested in that, or you want some motivation, as well as I have lots of socials that you can find me at as well. And feel free to reach out. I'm really the least scariest influencer ever. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for having me.